the ballot, it passes, and we all get really excited about that. 2 or 3 years down the road, the ball is pulled out, and let alone we're kicking the field goal, and we go, whoop, we're back to square one. So that's my concern about the...
You identified a major problem when you went through the tyranny issues that we have in here. And one of them is the power of the bureaucracy. We're talking about the voting group, but we've got a bureaucracy that sits there. It's got to be somewhere, the answer to that has to be initiated into your formula as to how we handle or make that bureaucracy more accountable to the elected officials.
Well, one of the ideas
it's a major problem.
Every bill has to have a sunset provision related
Good.
to it.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, that may be part of the state constitution, no more to exceed 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So that would be a way of readdressing that particular agency that gets built, which never gets disabled. Maybe there's certain things that are built into the Constitution. I don't know. I mean, that really needs to be thought at almost topic by topic. You know, I think there are some cases where turnover would be a good thing. In some cases, it may be more disruptive. I'm talking about education because, I mean, this is the easiest thing for people to understand as it relates to this model, which is a strong local government, a thin state government, avoiding federal entanglement. Easiest way to understand this is education. Okay, how many presidential candidates that since, I think I saw a video one time from Jimmy Carter on, have said, when you elect me for president, I'm going to end the Department of Education. Right? How many have done it? How many have talked about it? How many legislators, how many congressmen or senators have introduced a bill to end any federal department? Yeah, okay. So, made my point. So as a state level, we have a choice. We can say Common Core, not Common Core. What happens if we say no Common Core? We're ignoring all federal mandates. What happens? No federal funding. Okay, so is that something we can live with?
Yes.
Okay. I'm 100% with you. I've yet to, can anybody not live with that? To think we have to be beholden to federal funding as it relates to education?
You obviously don't get a government paycheck.
I don't want to either. So that's a perfect example. Let me ask you the question. Let me on school board here. Let me on school board. I'm in school board. Okay. So I've got the two guys that we've got right now writing the education policy paper. Former state board of education. I think currently or formerly on Colorado Association of School Boards. Claire Orr's, they're both in Weld County. Claire Orr used to be on the State Board of Education. Mike Freeman used to be on the Colorado Association of School Boards. So I asked the question to them. I said, what's the role of state government as it relates to, what would we have the Department of Education do at a state level, as opposed to something that could be done at the school board level? And they're like, I don't know. I can't really think of anything.
Contracts so you can buy things cheaply.
Well, that can happen through a cooperative. It doesn't have to happen
Exactly.
through a governmental agency.
However you do it, but that's the only
It can be
thing
done
that
through
can be
like an intergovernmental agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, counties cooperate all the time across counties. I mean, I don't know if you guys do that over here, but I remember we were sitting in Prowers County, and that was what they were talking about. I don't know, I forget what it was, but there were 4 or 5 counties with IGA that talked about that can happen. School boards can do the same thing. So there's no reason a purchasing cooperative can't happen of some sort. So that's the model, is you use education. So what would it look like to have school boards determine how to evaluate their kids, standardized testing or no standardized testing, and have a process for evaluating their teachers and administration? If that happened at the local level, all of a sudden school board elections become a whole lot more important.
They're important already.
Well,
Yeah.
how much money is invested by the state in things like hard assets, like school building, like school buses?
Yeah.
The state does not
Well,
buy any of the school buildings there. It's all here.
So here's the interesting thing we talked about at this education policy meeting that we're talking about. So right now, on average, about 70% of the funding comes from the state, 30% comes locally. You go back 25 or 30 years, it was flipped. That's what Claire and Mike are telling me. So it used to be 70% local, 30% state. Well, with the more funding at the state level, became more bureaucracy, more control, right?
Better pay for teachers, more staff.
Yeah.
Well,
So if you just think about the administrative overhead from the federal level, if you're on school board and I said, tell me how many FTEs are dedicated to reporting of federal mandates or, of course, responding to federal mandates and state mandates. And if you eliminated those positions, couldn't you redirect those dollars to do whatever it is that federal funding is compensating for right now?
Yeah.
The answer probably is yes. And, oh, the benefit to this is you have complete local control, right? So I know that we're trying to get in contact with Kit Carson County because their school district has this model. They have turned down federal funding for, I don't know for how long, but they've been in that role. They've deemed long ago it's not worth it. So we're trying to get kind of a case study put together on that. So we talk about education. That's, I think everybody here, I mean, are there any teachers in the audience? Do you like standardized testing? Okay. I've yet to meet even a hardcore left-wing union teacher that likes standardized testing. And why is that? Because you have to teach the exact same thing to kids that have very different past, present, and future. And isn't that true? So what you would teach a kid that's going to be a farmer or rancher his whole life is going to be a whole lot different than a kid that's going to go to be a welder or to be somebody that's going to go into college to be an accountant or a lawyer, for heaven's sake. So I mean, that's the reality. Is what school boards want is local control. They want to be able to teach the kids the way that they think that area should be taught. So that's our example education. So what we've got right now are a bunch of policy committees that we're starting to form. What we're asking counties to do is not to say, yes, we agree, we want to secede. It is to form a political union of sorts to say rural versus urban is no longer acceptable. Where we're at right now is no longer acceptable. Now we have a fourth option that has been presented, Commissioner, annexing into Utah. Very viable option. Hadn't thought of it. I think it's a great idea. Maybe Utah is much better than Wyoming. Governor Meade in Wyoming already said that his comment was this conversation of 51st state is not conducive to moving the nation forward or something like that. So maybe he's already given us his opinion. We haven't asked for his opinion at this
Or
point.
he's been talked to by somebody else.
There are all kinds of reasons. I mean, even as we talk through from county to county, I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why people want to do or not do something. Yes, right here.
I have a question for whoever might know. In Utah, do they have the same kind of battles between rural versus Salt Lake City that we have in Colorado of
Yes.
rural versus Denver?
So
Yeah.
that's
Why can't I
the
raise
primary question you have to ask yourself about annexing to another state is their vision of the state government what you really want? Are we exchanging a really bad situation for a better situation, but we're going to have in the same position 5, 10, 15 years or now? Or do you want to, now the time to make a stand with potentially slightly higher cost?
They got a bigger moderating factor that Colorado doesn't have, and it's called the Mormon Church.
That's right.
And that makes all the difference in the world as to what Salt Lake can get away with.
Yeah, and that may be a good thing or a bad thing as it relates to
Yeah.
looking at their
But
legislative
that's
modules and their individual
what
liberties. Yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
remember the Western Colorado Museum told me not long ago that in 1913, 100 years ago, they considered eastern Utah, western Colorado, joining Grand Junction, being the capital, and being called Western Colorado. I guess it didn't go anywhere. When West Virginia was taken away from Virginia during the Civil War, Lincoln gave it a pass because he felt, well, Virginia left the United States, which they did.
Right.
But after they came back into the United States, it wasn't given back to them.
Right.
West Virginia was not given back.
Yeah.
I spent the last 30 years at the beach before I came back here. California's got the same problem in spades. It ought to be 4 states. It's got that 10-mile wide toilet along the Pacific from LA to San Diego, and another little jaunt from San Francisco into Sacramento. And the rest of the state is like rural Colorado. You go New York, same problem. This is the beginning of a national movement, not just for us, but we need to make friends with everybody across the country that's got the same problem in the same way, because we need to solve it.
Right.
And however
Yeah.
we do it, but we got it. If we do it, if we try to stand up and do this alone, they're going to play whack-a-mole, and we're
Right.
going to get whacked.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And actually, we know, I've grown to know the guy that's heading the Western Maryland Initiative pretty well, a guy named Scott Strelzik. He has had a ton of publicity in the last couple of weeks all over the eastern coast.
it's a national.
Much more, so he was on Fox
Yep.
Video for the first time discussing the 51st State Initiative, or their initiative. Tom and I met last week. We were coming back from Prowers County, and the head of the Jefferson State Movement in Northern California happened to be in Denver, so we met with him for dinner.
I'd kind of highly recommend you have a conversation with Ken Ivory.
I've heard that, yeah, it's been suggested, yeah, and there are experts along the way, banking, public lands. Yeah.
This was mentioned earlier, but, you know, I think a good thing that would work is the initiative that you brought up about eventually the federal government was supposed to return the public lands to the states.
Right.
And if you get those public lands back, you're going to have a huge control of resources.
And source of funding for the state.
Yeah, and that will curtail these megalith cities because they have to depend on those resources.
Yeah, and this whole concept of nullifying, in essence, the Enabling Act to be able to be online. So maybe that's the Ken Ivory idea of it. No?
I think that would be
The Enabling Act and nullified already by the breach of contract. I think just the opposite. If the resources are there, it would give the large cities more initiative to keep us in the state because they want the money.
Well,
That's what they're all about, is grabbing our money from us and keeping it over there.
Right, and in response to that, we're going to use Governor Hickenlooper's words against him when he says it's clear that the urban population subsidized the rural population. So we're going to just hammer that over and over again. We all know it not to be true, but if the people that live in Denver, Boulder, that are going to be voting on this want to believe it, let them believe it.
We got the exact opposite from him when he was here in March and we protested against him.
Yeah.
In that he said to David and I while we stood in the hallway, the rural areas have to pay for the urban problems.
Right.
Simple as that.
Well, he admitted that in the gun control legislation when he said that rural communities have to be, what's this terminology, inconvenienced a little bit to change their, I think he said clip more often when they're shooting varmints and whatever else he said. That was completely insane.
Well, yeah.
And that is by and large the divide, if you want to call it divide. I mean, if they want to force an agenda on the urban population, I'm not in favor of it, but I mean, if that's what they want as a legislature, that's the concept of local control. You push it back down to the people. Now, if their people want to be lazy and allow them to violate their civil rights across the board or their inalienable rights across the board, so be it. But I don't think people in rural Colorado, you guys included, and all the people we talk to, they don't want Denver to dictate what's happening to them. They want to be able to control their lives and hold their elected accounted officials, which should have more authority or ability to protect those rights. So, yes, sir.
If you read the 1800 election between John Adams after his first term and Thomas Jefferson, it made these recent presidential elections where we had this instant news media. I mean, these guys were a bunch of pikers. They weren't even good at it. And the interesting thing is that John Adams carried the rural part of the 13 colonies, and Jefferson won the urban vote. He won. So this is nothing new. This has been going on since 1800.
Right. And it's nothing our framers.
I mean, it's just, but
it's nothing that our framers didn't originally envision. That's why they put Article 4, Section 3 in there. But they didn't put it in there because they didn't think it was going to be used or shouldn't be used.
For Western Colorado, coming from the Planning Commission, we have a property line adjustment, which is simple. So I asked our planning department, I said, it's a simple process, and the lady knows me, so she knew I was up to something. I said, well, let's just move it to the Continental Divide, would be part of Utah, and if you put it on the ballot in Colorado, it might actually, on the western slope, pass.
Well, and there's no reason, if that's the right solution, that whole horseshoe chain, and I think maybe the donut hole, can't do the same thing. I mean, the reality is the donut hole can be fixed.
The reality is they forced a donut hole on us in 2011.
Yeah. And then just quickly, the donut hole can be fixed because all we've got to do is draw a 10-foot line from Boulder County through Larimer County to hit Wyoming, and the donut hole thing has been fixed. Then the rest of the state can go. I mean, we can draw the lines. That's the beauty of a citizens initiative. If they force us to go through and draw and develop a citizens initiative, we're going to do it the way we want to. If they want to allow it to be referred to the ballot, then maybe there's some cooperation in that. Is that fair? So, yes, sir.
On your website, you mentioned some other states, but what other states are doing. It sounds like what they're doing in Illinois is trying to kick Chicago out of the state. How's that going?
Well, we haven't talked to anybody there. We don't know if that's really a kind of a more of a political statement or a serious movement. I mean, clearly Cook County versus the rest of the state, it would be the exact same issue. I mean, I've got a good friend that lives in downstate Illinois, and he's like, we should get this going. I'm like, yeah, you should get this going. It's Kansas too. I mean, Kansas is a red state. There's 8 or 10 counties in the western part of Kansas that wanted to secede at one point. Yeah, yeah. Nebraska, we hear the same thing. There's counties in Nebraska, in the western panhandle of Nebraska, that are frustrated.
The story is the same across the country in that the legislature is dominated by the urban areas. I'm from Missouri. I've lived in Illinois as well. Chicago controls the state of Illinois. St. Louis and Kansas City, fortunately, can be offset in Missouri, but it's the same thing. Anywhere where you have a large population center, the areas outside that center are losing big time, and people are tired of it.
Yeah, and it's back to that. I'm looking for the Lord Acton quote. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It is the same concept, and it's that back to man, ego will determine to do what's best to keep them in office and to do whatever they think makes them to be the king. I don't know what it is, but it's the inherent nature of man. I mean, it's the cycle of man from the beginning of time to this point.
Well, also, I think special interests have driven this heavily. Because
Same
they
thing,
don't want to deal
self-interest.
with 50 states or 64 counties, so they centralize power.
Right.
And centralize bureaucracies, and then they just sit there in between them and say, you need to do this. And that's what happens when you allow special interests unfettered access.
And if you give more control to the local level, to the extent that your county, your city officials, your school board officials, your planning commission, your commissioners, that you feel like they are being worked by the system,
sure they
you
are.
have the power of recall. We've seen that. We've seen that work.
Well, yeah.
You have the power of the next vote, and it's much easier to make a change by getting 50 of your neighbors to get fired up in a school board election, which we're doing, you're doing. Much easier to make that change than it is to get the whole body, the state legislature, to change when the deck is stacked against you, which it is. So what we're offering, what we're hoping to do in terms of building an alliance is saying use the umbrella of the 51st State Initiative to pursue thoughtful, intentional, deliberate research on what's the vision for the new state, right? Feedback on this, happy to get it. What does that mean practically at a policy level? Energy policy. We got horrible energy policy in this state. The fuel switching bill, right? As an example, we got an assault on oil and gas fracking from the front range. We have agriculture. I mean, I imagine most counties that are agriculturally driven could agree upon agricultural policy, right? So there are things where I think we could clearly agree, and some things that we have to work through some disagreements on. I like the concept of state banking. I like the concept of how do we avoid catastrophic devaluation of our currency that destroys our lives, which I think for those of you who probably know is coming at some point.
Yes, it is.
And the reality is we need to form a state. We need to be effective and win this battle. One of us are 4 groups. If you look at Northern California, the guy from Northern California, he goes, I don't care which one of the 4 of us are first. We need to do it. We need to get a foothold in the door. We need to work together as a team. We need to develop a coalition of liberty-minded people and state governments to be able to fight back against the federal government. Right now, we're divided and conquered. Yeah.
I think that this Phillips Amendment would be a good intermediary step because
Certainly.
It would start building awareness. If it passed, it would be a tremendous boost to people believing that they can take power back.
Right.
And it would be very hard for them to argue against it.
And the real great thing is it eliminates part of the shenanigans that went on in the reapportionment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I sound a little pessimistic, because I'm thinking long term, and I think the best solution long term is 51st state. But man, I tell you, it would be a whole lot better off than where we are right now, because what we're on is that we're skiing uphill. And
the problem with doing the battle without the 51st state is who is going to do the battle? Our governor's not going to carry the torch for that. Our legislature's not going to carry the torch. Is your county gonna do it?
And it would have to be a citizen's initiative.
It's,
Yeah.
And,
it's gotta
all
be
the
paid
rural
for.
counties.
Somebody's
Well,
gotta
and
pay.